Eliza May had never seen herself as someone meant for a wild frontier marriage, much less as a bride promised to a warrior she had never met. She was a slight, quiet woman in her early 20s, with pale skin that burned easily in the sun and hands that bore the calluses of survival, not beauty. Life had already left her battered. She had lost her husband in a border skirmish 2 winters ago, and not long after, a fever claimed her infant son. With no family left but a younger brother barely managing to keep food on the table, Eliza had been living like a shadow dot. It was her brother who first brought the idea to her. A political marriage to a native warrior. He's Apache, a leader of sorts, they say. Keeps his men in line. Keeps the peace, her brother explained, rubbing his temples. He asked for a wife from the settler folk, one who knows hard work and won't shy from tribal life. I gave your name. Eliza blinked, too stunned to speak. She hadn't been asked, she had been given. As if she were a cow to be traded. Her brother looked away, ashamed, but firm. He offers protection for the trade routes and our farm, what's left of it. The deal could help everyone in town. You'll be safe, Fed. And maybe you can start again. The words stung, but Eliza couldn't deny the truth in them. She had no prospects, no children, no land. Her brother had bartered the only thing left her. A week later, she sat in a dusty wagon headed toward Apache territory, escorted by a pair of gruff settlers and one interpreter who could speak some Apache dialect. They didn't talk much on the road. Eliza sat clutching the woven basket in her lap, the last thing her mother ever made. It was empty now, except for a few wrapped herbs, a comb, and a thin, worn Bible. As the mountains gave way to red earth and mesas, Eliza's nerves coiled tighter. Her thoughts kept circling. Would he be cruel? Would he hate the sight of her? Would she have to share his bed that very night? She reminded herself of what she had endured. She had buried a child with her own hands. She had survived winter alone, patching her roof with scraps. She was no delicate flower, even if her body didn't show it. They arrived at dusk. The Apache camp was larger than she expected, orderly rows of lodges and lean-tos surrounded by fire pits and corralled horses. The people watched as she climbed down from the wagon. Some women narrowed their eyes. Others simply looked away. Children whispered behind their mothers' skirts. Then he appeared. Tall Coyote. His name suited him. He stood easily over 6.5 feet, shoulders broad, chest bare under a beaded vest. His expression was unreadable, strong cheekbones, black hair braided down his back, and eyes that swept over her once, then again. Eliza tried to stand straight despite her shaking knees. The interpreter stepped forward, speaking briefly in Apache. Then, in English, he translated the warrior's first words. "You're smaller than I expected." I wanted a sturdy woman. The camp fell silent. Eliza's cheeks burned. She gripped the basket tighter, swallowing the lump in her throat. She didn't know what she expected, a warm welcome, maybe, but not this. Not to be judged on her frame. Like livestock. Still, he did not walk away. Tall Coyote turned to the elders, spoke again, then motioned for her to be brought to his lodge. The agreement stood. Though no joy showed on his face. As she was led away, Eliza felt dozens of eyes on her, not just from the women, from someone else, a young warrior leaning against a post-red hawk. Though she didn't know his name yet, watched her, not with disdain, but with something else. Curiosity? Pity? It wasn't clear. But unlike the others, he didn't look away when she met his gaze. He simply nodded, ever so slightly. It was the first kindness she saw in that place. And so, Eliza May, the war widow with nowhere left to go, stepped into a marriage that was not hers by choice. Not a romance, not a union of hearts, but a trade. Had been promised. But she had not been chosen, not yet. and unbeknownst to her, someone had already begun watching. And waiting. Eliza had expected many things: awkward silences, language barriers, a sense of isolation, but nothing had prepared her for her first full day in the Apache village as the bride of a man who clearly hadn't chosen her. After Tall Coyote's blunt comment, "You're smaller than I expected," I wanted a sturdy woman. She'd spent the evening in stunned silence, sitting inside the lodge that had been hastily prepared for her. The space was sparse but clean. A buffalo hide covered the floor. Blankets were neatly stacked in a corner. A fire pit in the center glowed softly as night fell. But Tall Coyote didn't stay. He gave her a brief nod before disappearing into the darkness, leaving her alone in the lodge. Not a word of welcome. No gesture of kindness. Just silence. She lay that night with her eyes open, staring at the hide ceiling, trying to keep her thoughts from spiraling. Was this her punishment? Her future? Would she always be just the woman who wasn't enough? The morning brought little comfort. As she stepped out into the bright sun, she noticed a cluster of women gathered around a water barrel. Their voices hushed as she approached. Eliza didn't understand the words, but the tone was unmistakable curiosity mixed with judgment. She gave a small nod, clutching her shawl, and kept walking. A tall, broad woman with strong arms and a braided crown of black hair stepped forward from the group and introduced herself in broken English. "I am Mourning Dove. I help you learn. You are wife now." Eliza offered a small smile. "Thank you." Mourning Dove tilted her head, eyes scanning Eliza's figure. "You? Small." Her tone wasn't cruel, just observational. But maybe strong inside. That comment, simple as it was, stayed with Eliza for the rest of the day. Later that afternoon, she was summoned to meet with Tall Coyote again. She didn't know whether it was a custom, a formal acknowledgement, or something else. He stood near the horse corral, instructing two boys on how to reinforce the fence. When he saw her approaching, he gestured for her to follow him. They walked in silence toward a stream on the edge of the camp. It was the first time they were alone since her arrival. Finally, he spoke. His English was measured, slightly accented. "You came because your people sent you. You did not choose." "I didn't," Eliza admitted, "but I came willingly." He looked at her then, brow furrowed. "I expected a woman, big, strong, a worker. I see you and think, how will you carry a child? How will you help a camp?" The words were sharp, but not unkind. Just honest. Eliza bristled. "I may not be large, but I've worked harder than Anben. Most men I know. I've survived things no woman should face alone. If strength only lives in arms and backs, then maybe I don't have it, but there are other kinds." Tall Coyote studied her for a moment, then nodded once. He didn't apologize. Apache men rarely did, but his tone softened. "You speak with fire. That is good." They sat beside the stream, and for the first time, they spoke haltingly of what they each expected. Tall Coyote made it clear. This marriage was not one of affection. It was a bond meant for peace, for stability, for the eyes of their people. He did not promise her love. Eliza didn't ask for it, but something shifted in that quiet space. Perhaps not affection, but mutual acknowledgement. What Eliza didn't see, however, was that they weren't alone. Red Hawk, Tall Coyote's younger brother, stood further back behind a tree, close enough to hear but hidden from view. He hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but curiosity pulled him in. From the moment Eliza had stepped from the wagon, he'd felt something unfamiliar stir in him. She was not like the loud, strong women of his people. She moved differently. Her eyes held stories, old pain, and something that looked like defiance trying to bloom. He watched as she held her ground with his brother. She didn't beg, didn't flatter, didn't wilt. And though she looked fragile, She didn't flinch when Tall Coyote spoke harshly. Red Hawk didn't fully understand what drew him to her, only that he found himself watching more than he should and wondering what would happen if someone truly saw the strength she was hiding. Back at the camp, Eliza and Tall Coyote returned to their separate duties. No grand decisions had been made, no emotional breakthroughs, but the air between them had shifted from cold distance to quiet acknowledgement, and somewhere among the brush, someone else had seen what even Tall Coyote could not. Someone was watching, and he was beginning to care. Eliza May woke to the sound of morning fires crackling and the distant thud of horses' hooves. Her first few days in the Apache village blurred into a rhythm she hadn't expected: long hours of silence, quick glances from women, and the growing realization that she would have to build a new life from the ground up. Tall Coyote remained distant. Though their marriage had been formalized before the elders, it existed in name only. They did not share sleeping space, meals, or conversation beyond necessities. He came and went without explanation. His presence was like a shadow, always nearby but never truly seen. He didn't mistreat her, but neither did he claim her as his wife in any meaningful way. At first, Eliza thought this might be a kindness. After all, she hadn't chosen him either. But as days passed, the silence began to feel like exile. She didn't know where she stood in the lodge, in the tribe, in the eyes of the man who was supposed to protect her. What made it bearable were the women. Though guarded at first, a few of them began to warm to her, especially Mourning Dove, the strong woman who had greeted her on her first day. Mourning Dove didn't smile easily, but she had a firm, steady way of showing care. She brought Eliza firewood in the early mornings and guided her through the ways of the camp: how to grind corn with a smooth stone, how to carry water on her back, how to listen for signs of a snake or scorpion. "We watch you," Mourning Dove said one day as they shelled beans. "You work hard. That matters here, not how tall you are, not how wide your hips." Eliza gave a weak smile. "That's good to hear." Still, not all eyes were kind. Some of the women looked at her as though she were a ghost, pale, out of place, and unsettling. A few men scoffed when she dropped a water jug or struggled with a bundle of firewood too heavy for her frame. Children sometimes whispered behind her back in Apache, and though she couldn't understand the words, she could feel the mockery in their tone. But Eliza didn't break. She rose each morning before dawn. She mended what she could, offered help where it was needed, and never once asked to return home, even though the thought crossed her mind more than once. And always, quietly, in the background, there was Red Hawk. He never approached her directly, but she noticed him watching from afar, working beside Tall Coyote during hunts, sitting across the fire during council gatherings. His expression was unreadable, but his gaze lingered longer than it should have. He didn't judge. He didn't mock. There was a stillness about him, a calm curiosity that made her feel strangely safe. One day, while carrying a bundle of herbs back to the lodge, Eliza tripped over a stone and spilled them across the dirt path. Before she could even bend down to gather them, Red Hawk appeared at her side. He crouched silently, helping her pick up the scattered leaves. "You know what these are for?" he asked in quiet, careful English. Eliza blinked, surprised to hear him speak. "For the elder with the cough," she said. "Mourning Dove showed me." He nodded, brushing dust from a handful of leaves. "Good, you're learning." It wasn't just what he said, it was how he said it. No judgment, no amusement, just a calm kind of recognition. That moment lingered with her. Later that night, as she sat alone beside her lodge's fire, Eliza found herself staring up at the stars. She wasn't in love. She wasn't happy. But she wasn't broken either. Something was shifting inside her. Maybe it was the rhythm of the land, the way the wind whispered through the canyons, or the way some of the women had begun calling her sister instead of stranger. Maybe it was the way Red Hawk had. looked at her not as a burden, but as someone worth noticing. Her life here was hard. Her heart was still guarded. But for the first time in a long time, she felt like she had space to breathe. Even if Tall Coyote never came to love her, even if the whole arrangement had been a transaction, there were still things to be grateful for: a place to sleep, a fire to tend, and just maybe a pair of quiet eyes that saw her not as a disappointment, but as someone with a future. Eliza May had long understood that words wouldn't earn her respect in the Apache camp, only action would. And though she was still finding her footing among these strangers, the opportunity to prove herself came sooner than expected. It began subtly. A child, no more than 4 or 5, began coughing during the evening fires. At first, it seemed minor, just the kind of cough that comes with the change of seasons. But within 2 days, more children were showing the same symptoms. Then the elders. Then 2 of the warriors. Soon, nearly a quarter of the camp was showing signs of fever, chills, and shortness of breath. A sickness was spreading, and fast. Panic never erupted in the open, but Eliza could feel it in the way people avoided each other's touch, the way mothers clutched their children tighter, and the way even the warriors began whispering among themselves. Some blamed bad spirits, others suspected tainted water. Regardless of the cause, one thing was clear: people were afraid, and Eliza knew. Fear. She had lived through an outbreak before, back in her childhood settlement, lost her aunt and cousin to it. Her mother had taught her certain remedies: wild willow bark for fevers, pine sap boiled in tea for cough, and garlic poultices to draw out the heat. Crude, but better than nothing. So she didn't wait for permission. She began moving between sick lodges, quietly helping where she could, gathering herbs, boiling water, forcing sips of tea down dry, feverish throats. She ripped her own petticoat into strips to use as cool compresses. Many of the Apache women still kept their distance, but a few, like Morning Dove, noticed what she was doing and began to help. She worked through the night without rest. By dawn, she was pale, soaked in sweat, and nearly falling over from exhaustion, but still moving. When she went to tend one of the sick children, the girl's mother hesitated. Eliza didn't understand her words, but the meaning was clear. "Why are you doing this?" Eliza simply placed her hand over her own heart and whispered, "Because I've lost a child too." The woman's eyes softened. She let Eliza pass. By the second day, Eliza had gained a small team: 3 women and 1 elder who'd been too weak to work, but sat and helped her sort herbs. They followed her lead, copying her methods. She had no official standing in the tribe, no authority. But she had earned something far greater: trust. Red Hawk had been watching, not hovering, not interfering, but quietly observing. He saw the way she forced herself to keep going, even as her own hands trembled. He saw her kneel beside men twice her size without fear. He watched as she poured herself out for people who still only half accepted her, and something in him stirred deeply, permanently. On the 3rd night, Eliza stumbled out of a lodge after helping a child through a bout of vomiting. She leaned against a tree, breathing hard, her strength nearly gone. That's when Red Hawk appeared, holding out a clay cup filled with water. "Drink," he said softly. She took it with shaking hands. "Thank you." He looked at her, truly looked at her. "You are not what my brother wanted, but maybe you are what we needed." Eliza blinked, unsure what to say. Red Hawk continued, "You fight like a warrior, with your hands, with your heart." It was the closest thing to praise she had heard since arriving. By the 5th day, the illness began to retreat. The children were recovering. No deaths had occurred, something of a miracle in a place with so few medicines. The elders held a small gathering to thank those who had helped. Eliza was not named publicly, but many eyes turned toward her with new weight, new respect. Even Tall Coyote. He approached her near the water trough later that day. His voice was quiet. "You saved many. We owe you." Eliza only nodded. She wasn't seeking gratitude. But the acknowledgement felt like a stone lifting from her chest. She might be small. She might not be the sturdy woman Tall Coyote had expected. But she had carried this camp through something dangerous. With her hands, with her mind, with her will. And the people had seen it. She wasn't just the outsider anymore. She was becoming something more. The illness had passed, but something deeper lingered in the Apache camp, a new air of quiet respect surrounding Eliza May. Her actions during the fever outbreak had earned her a place in the eyes of many, even if no one said it aloud. Where there had once been wary glances, now there were nods of acknowledgement. The children who once whispered behind her back now ran past her lodge to wave. She wasn't fully one of them. Not yet, but she was no longer invisible. Even Tall Coyote seemed to regard her differently. Though still reserved, his tone softened when he spoke to her. He occasionally asked after her well-being, whether she had enough firewood or food. But it was clear, theirs remained a marriage in name only. A political alliance, a duty fulfilled. He treated her more like a valuable member of the camp than a wife. Eliza told herself that was enough. Until everything changed. One morning, a hunting party including both Tall Coyote and his younger brother, Red Hawk, set off before sunrise. They were tracking a herd of elk believed to be migrating early, a gift before winter. Eliza watched them disappear into the tree line, her eyes lingering. Longer than they should have on Red Hawk. His presence had grown steady in her life's small, quiet gestures. A nod of encouragement, a cup of water, a simple phrase in English to make her feel seen. 2 days later, the riders returned, but not all of them. Tall Coyote had been badly injured during the hunt. A startled elk had led him off a ridge, and he'd fallen into a ravine. His leg was broken, his ribs possibly cracked, and there were gashes on his back from the sharp stones. Red Hawk and the others had carried him home, wrapped in furs, nearly unconscious from the pain and cold. The camp was shaken. Though strong, Tall Coyote was the pillar of leadership and strength for many. His injury felt like a blow to the entire tribe. Eliza was at his side immediately. She didn't wait for instruction. She pulled the blankets back, examined the wounds, and called for hot water and clean cloths. Morning Dove joined her, and together they cleaned and dressed his injuries. They brewed pain-relieving teas from herbs she had used during the fever outbreak. She splinted his leg with strips of hide and a pair of smooth branches. Day and night she remained beside him, wiping sweat from his brow, helping him drink, whispering calm words when he groaned through fevered sleep. It was during these long nights that something shifted again, not just in the eyes of the tribe but within Eliza herself. This man had not loved her, had barely acknowledged her as a wife. But now, helpless in his pain, he was in her care, and she cared, not because she was told to, not out of duty, but because loyalty was stitched into her spirit, deeper than resentment. On the third night, Red Hawk came to check on his brother. Eliza was sitting beside the fire, her eyes red with exhaustion, her fingers stained with salve and blood. "You haven't slept?" he said. She shook her head. "Not until he's out of danger." Red Hawk crouched beside her, his voice low. "Why do you do this?" Eliza looked at him, confusion in her eyes. "He hasn't been a husband to you. He never wanted you. Yet you care for him like a wife who loves deeply." She didn't answer right away. Then, softly, she said, "Because I made a vow, and I don't break those." Red Hawk was quiet for a long moment. "You're the strongest woman I've ever known. And I've known many." His words warmed her more than the fire. A few days later, Tall Coyote regained full consciousness. He didn't speak much, but his eyes followed Eliza now. He watched the way she moved, the care she gave, the steadiness in her presence. One evening he called for Red Hawk and spoke in Apache. Eliza didn't understand all of it, but she caught a few words. Later that night, Red Hawk approached her alone. He said, Red Hawk explained gently, that maybe the people chose better than he did.
That maybe strength isn't in the body,
but in the heart. Eliza looked away, unsure how to respond, but Red Hawk stepped closer. I've known that for a while now. And in that moment, Eliza realized something had changed, not just in how others saw her, but in how she saw herself. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was becoming someone worthy of being chosen not for duty, but for love. The air grew heavy with the scent of rain. The sky, once clear, now brooded with gray clouds pressing low over the mountains. Animals moved restlessly in their pens, and the wind carried a strange tension warning of a storm far stronger than any seen in recent moons. Eliza, May had learned to read the signs. She hurried to secure the lodge, tucking in loose hides, anchoring the cooking pots, and moving herbs to higher ground. Morning Dove joined her, their hands working silently side by side. Everyone in the camp was preparing. Apache people were no strangers to weather, but this storm felt different. The elders said it carried more than wind and water, it carried omens. That evening, the storm came. It hit like a roaring beast, thunder rolling across the sky, lightning tearing open the darkness. The wind howled so fiercely that some of the smaller lodges threatened to lift from the ground. Rain lashed like knives against the skin. The camp huddled in their shelters, trying to wait it out. Eliza had just finished checking on Tall Coyote, who was still recovering from his injuries. His fever had broken, but his ribs were still tender, and his leg remained splinted. As she turned to leave the lodge and head back to her own, she heard a faint cry. At first, she thought it was the wind. But then she heard it again, small and sharp, like a child calling out. Without hesitation, Eliza pushed through the curtain and into the storm, following the sound. She rounded a lodge and found two small children barely old enough to speak standing near a collapsed shelter, drenched and crying. Their mother was nowhere in sight. Elena! Eliza cried over the thunder, scooping the younger one into her arms and grabbing the other's hand. Come on. She ran with them, half blind through the wind and rain, trying to reach the larger cave near the western edge of the village, a natural shelter the tribe used in emergencies. But the storm was wild, and the path was slick with mud. Branches snapped overhead, and the children clung to her with wide, terrified eyes. They reached the cave, and she pushed them inside, wrapping them in her shawl. But before she could rest, something shifted in the windy smell. Sharp and wrong. Smoke. But not from their fires. Raiders. Outlaws. From another band emboldened by the storm had chosen this moment to strike. With the camp distracted and huddled, they had crept close under the cover of night and chaos. Eliza heard the sound of footsteps approaching, fast men, unfamiliar voices, speaking in a dialect she didn't know. She crouched low in the cave, pressing the children behind her. Her heart pounded. She had no weapons, no way to defend them. Still, she rose when the first figure entered the cave. He was tall, soaked and armed with a rusted blade. When he saw her, he grinned cruelly, clearly expecting an easy prize, a woman, alone with children, too weak to resist. But Eliza didn't back down. She stepped forward, placing herself between the raider and the children, her arms wide, her chin lifted. You'll have to kill me first, she said in a voice she didn't recognize as her own. The man raised his weapon, and that's when an arrow whistled through the storm and struck the ground at his feet. A second later, Red Hawk appeared. From the trees, soaked to the bone, bow in hand, he moved like a shadow of the storm itself. Without a word, he loosed a second arrow, grazing the raider's arm and sending him scrambling backward. Red Hawk charged, blade drawn, and within moments, the cave was safe again. He turned to Eliza, panting. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, trembling now that the danger had passed. "The children, they're safe." "You shouldn't have come alone," he said, not in anger but in fear. "You could have been killed." "I couldn't." "Leave them," she whispered. Red Hawk stared at her, eyes dark with something deeper than concern. "You're not just brave, Eliza. You're more than any of us expected." She looked at him, truly looked, and saw a man who had always been there, watching, supporting, protecting Dot. In that moment, she realized something else. She wasn't afraid anymore. Not of storms or strangers, or being unwanted, because someone had seen her. Dot, and in the firelight of that storm-soaked cave, she felt for the first time not like a woman traded or tolerated, but like one who might be chosen. The storm had passed, but it left the Apache camp change-strewn with broken branches, scattered tools, and battered shelters. Yet amid the chaos, no lives had been lost, and for that, the tribe was grateful. The raiders had been driven off. Quickly, thanks to Red Hawk's sharp eyes and Eliza's fearless defense of the children. Word of her bravery spread through the camp, not in loud celebrations, but in quiet, meaningful nods, shared glances, and whispered stories told by the fires. Eliza, for her part, didn't feel brave. She still trembled when she remembered the raiders' eyes. She still woke at night hearing the storm in her dreams. But what lingered more than the fear was Red Hawk's presence, the way he'd stepped into the cave without hesitation, how he'd looked at her afterward, not with surprise, but with something much deeper, recognition. Since the storm, something had shifted between them. Red Hawk began appearing more often, not just in passing, but in deliberate, quiet ways. He brought her a new woven shawl to replace the one she had given to the children. He repaired a cracked water jug outside her lodge without being asked. He began teaching her Apache words, correcting her gently, smiling when she remembered them. It was subtle, respectful, never imposing, but the air between them buzzed with something unspoken. Eliza noticed everything. She noticed how his eyes sought hers, across gatherings, how his silence always seemed comfortable, never cold, and how his presence no longer made her nervous but safe. She didn't know what to do with those feelings. She was still technically Tall Coyote's wife. The camp still saw her that way. But the truth was harder, quieter, and heavier. Tall Coyote had never truly accepted her. And now everyone knew it. The elders had eyes too. One of them, an old woman, with braided silver hair and hawk-like eyes, approached Eliza during a morning meal. "You have given our people much," she said in slow, deliberate English. "Healing hands, brave heart. You belong more than some who were born here." Eliza dipped her head respectfully. The woman continued, "You were placed with the wrong man, but the right man has been watching you." Eliza's breath caught. "I don't understand." The old woman's smile was slow and knowing. "You do." And Eliza did. She saw it all clearly now. From the first day she arrived, Red Hawk had been watching, but not the way others did, not to measure or judge her. He watched to learn her, to understand her. He had seen her smallness not as weakness, but as resilience, her quiet as strength. He had recognized something in her that even Tall Coyote had missed, the will to endure, to protect, to love without needing to be asked. That night, after the camp had eaten and the fires began to die down, Red Hawk approached her lodge. He didn't speak at first, just stood there, holding something wrapped in deerskin. She invited him to sit, and he placed the bundle in her lap. Inside was a carved wooden figure, small and simple, shaped like a woman with long hair and a cloak. "I made it," he said quietly, "after the storm. I wanted you to have it." Eliza ran her fingers over the smooth surface, her chest tight. "It's beautiful." He looked at her then, his voice low but steady. "I watched you because I was curious, but over time, I started hoping that maybe you were not meant for my brother after all. That maybe you were meant for someone who would truly see you." Eliza's eyes met his, shimmering with something she hadn't let herself feel in years. Possibility. "But I belong to him," she whispered. Red Hawk shook his head. "You were given to him. That is not the same." The truth in those words broke something open in her dot, and in that silence, heavy and sacred, she allowed herself to hope to. Later that week, a quiet meeting was held with the elders, Tall Coyote, and Red Hawk. Eliza was invited. Tall Coyote spoke with no bitterness. His words, spoken first in Apache and then translated, were direct. "I will release her. She was not mine in heart, and I will not keep what does not belong." Eliza expected to feel shame, but instead she felt free. The elders gave their blessing. The bond between her and Tall Coyote would be peacefully dissolved. And though no formal promises were spoken between Eliza and Red Hawk that night, their eyes said what their mouths had not yet dared to. "You see me. I choose you because someone had always been watching." And now she was ready to watch back. The sun rose quietly the morning after Eliza's bond with Tall Coyote was peacefully dissolved. There was no ceremony, no shame, no outcry. In the Apache way, when something had no roots, no shared spirit, no warmth, there was no sense in forcing it to grow. And now that understanding gave Eliza something she hadn't felt in a long time: freedom. She stepped out of her lodge with the air crisp on her face and her heart strangely light. For months she had lived in a space where she was expected to survive, to endure. But now, for the first time since leaving her old life behind, she wasn't surviving out of obligation. She was staying because she wanted to. Word spread quickly through the camp. The whispers weren't cruel, more like a wind of change people had long seen coming. Some said Tall Coyote had done right by setting her free. Others quietly wondered if she would leave now that she wasn't bound to anyone. But Eliza didn't pack her things. She didn't prepare a wagon. She stayed, and Red Hawk noticed. He didn't approach her immediately. He gave her space, letting her settle into this new life as a woman unclaimed. But each day he was near, bringing her herbs, helping her gather firewood, sitting beside her in council gatherings where he never had before. There was something tender in the silence between them, as if words weren't needed just yet. One evening, while the stars shimmered above the open plains, Red Hawk invited her to walk with him. They moved quietly through the trees, the moonlight silvering the earth. Neither rushed. They had waited this long. What was a few more moments? After a while, he stopped by a small rise overlooking the camp, the same place he had once stood watching her so many moons ago. "I used to come here often," he said. "To think, to watch." She looked at him gently. "To watch me?" He nodded, his voice steady. "I didn't understand at first what I saw. You were quiet, wounded, not the kind of woman we are used to here. But you carried your pain like armor. You moved like someone who had already survived the worst." Eliza looked down, her fingers playing with the edge of her shawl. "I didn't think anyone noticed." "I did," he said. "Every day." They stood there in silence, the air charged with years of longing, loss, and newfound clarity. Then he turned toward her fully. "I know you've had your choices taken from you before, but this time no one speaks for you. Not my brother. Not the elders. Not even me." His eyes softened. "So I ask you plainly, what do you want, Eliza?" The question struck deep. For so long, her life had been dictated by war, by grief, by family, by duty. She had always done what was expected. But here was a man offering her something different. Not possession, not protection, not pity. Choice. She looked up at him, her voice small but sure. I want to stay. And I want to stand beside someone who sees me, all of me. Red Hawk took her hand in his warm, rough, steady. Then stay and be beside me. Their bond wasn't forged in the ways her old life would have called proper. There was no minister, no white dress, no crowd. But the Apache way honored spirit over spectacle. And the tribe already knew what words could not say. In the weeks that followed, Eliza's life began to truly bloom. She wasn't a stranger anymore. The children sought her out to help mend their moccasins. The women shared herbs and stories around the fire. The elders invited her opinion during planning. And Red Hawk, he was her anchor and her light. They built a new lodge together, half of it crafted by her hands, the other by his. It was simple, but it was theirs. One evening, as they sat watching the fire crackle, Red Hawk placed something in her lap, a necklace woven with bone and turquoise. It belonged to my mother, he said. It is given to the woman who walks with the heart of our family. Eliza's hands trembled as she accepted it. She hadn't just found a new life. She had chosen it from the girl who had once been offered like a trade. To the woman who stood her ground in storms and sickness, Eliza had become more than anyone expected, because someone had been watching her all along. But now, finally, she was watching back and stepping into a future made not of survival, but of love freely chosen.